Welcome to the most valuable 30 minutes you'll spend this August, where you'll learn the 5 secrets of advertising sales masters. I'm Dan Ambrose. I'll be talking about the 5 secrets that separate the good from the great advertising salespeople. Before I introduce myself and get started with the 5 secrets, let me briefly review the mechanics of the webinar today. 30 minutes is a short time, so I'll be powering through the presentation with dispatch. I urge you to use the control panel on the side of your screen to send in questions at any time. Please send them when they occur to you. I'll answer the most common questions before I sign off if I can, but I promise, because of limited time, I'll answer all the questions by email after the webinar. Also, I want to call your attention to the fact that I've arranged for a special 10% discount for 5 Secrets attendees to the 1- or 2-day full-day skills seminars in New York City, October 1st and 2nd, hosted by MediaPost. The 2 full days Masters of Media Selling seminars address in far greater detail how to execute on the 5 secrets I'm discussing here, along with a complete strategic sales system. I'll explain how to get your discount at the end of the webinar, and the instructions are on the slide at the end. Now, on to the 5 secrets. Our agenda today, first of all, we'll start with a brief introduction about myself and my background. We'll talk about why there are 5 secrets, what the 5 secrets are, and then a little bit about how to improve your ability to use the 5 secrets. I've been doing advertising sales for more than 30 years. I started out doing ad sales in a regional magazine, then at American Film Magazine, at the American Film Institute, and later at House Beautiful at Hearst magazines. I was in sales management at Hearst and at Ziff Davis. Ziff Davis, you might know, is famous for the structured advertising sales training they provided all their salespeople. I was publisher at Child magazine when it was owned by the New York Times Company, and I've been doing consulting and training for publishers since 1994. I've had literally hundreds of clients and taught thousands of salespeople the keys to advertising sales success. A couple of interesting things, because so many of you out there are focused on selling internet or digital media, I thought I'd talk about some specific personal experiences I've had with digital media. I was involved in the launch of BeliefNet, which was purchased by News Corp about 5 years ago for $400 million, a faith-based, non-denominational media company. Helped with the launch of and trained the initial salespeople on the launch of iVillage that was purchased by NBC for $600 million about 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. It seems to be passing fast. Helped with the launch of Caboose and served on their board of directors, which we sold to Disney about 3 years ago, and helped write the business plan and helped Laurel Toby raise the money to start Media Bistro. So I've worked in many, many different kinds of media, national, local, specialized, B2B, hobbyist, video, TV, even sampling and couponing programs, which we did for American Baby when I worked at Connors Publishing Company. So enough about me. Why are there 5 secrets of advertising sales? Well, we tried to figure out what makes the difference between good salespeople and not good salespeople. And I think the answer is not as simple as putting the sales staff on performance-enhancing drugs. So the 5 secrets. The first secret is that the better salespeople, the best salespeople, do a much better job of calling on the highest level decision makers. They don't call exclusively on buyers or so-called buyers. They call on many people who influence the purchase decisions made by those buyers. We'll talk more about that later. I should say before I go back onto the second bullet point that one of the common complaints that I have from media management that I talk to is that their salespeople have such a small number of sales calls per day or per week or per month. And that's because there's too much focus on calling on the people you're quote-unquote told to call on, the buyers who say, call on me, don't call on my boss. But the really successful salespeople call on many people who influence that buyer. Second of all, prospects don't allow you enough time to ask a lot of questions in the sales process. And that's a difficult thing to get over, but I've got the solution for you. Because in the old days, you could go on a sales call and ask a lot of questions and then formulate your responses. In today's super rushed world, you've got to know what you're doing before you get there. The third big secret is starting your sales persuasion with agreement. Too many sales presentations are like a bad blind date. They start off about the media company that's making the presentation. They never make reference to the company you're selling to. That's like going on a sales call or going on a blind date and talking about yourself the whole time. That's the difference between the best salespeople and the average salespeople. Finally, objections. Okay, good salespeople know that they have to find, they have to love the objections. We'll talk about how to make that work for you. Objections are not a problem. In fact, you won't make any progress at all without hearing them and dealing with them. And finally, most salespeople have a difficult time understanding what to quote-unquote close on. You can't ask for the business on the spot because the person you're selling to can't give you the business on the spot. In most cases with big national advertisers, they're not going to make the decision while they're sitting with you. They're going to make the decision in a group situation with others. So how we can figure out what to close on is something that separates the best from the rest. Just to give you a sense of the big picture here, I think of all the whole picture of sales, of advertising sales. The skill sets sort of fall into three buckets. One is time and territory management. There are a bunch of activities under time and territory management that all help you get to the right place at the right time with the right information to make a sale. That could be on the phone. That could be in person. It could be at a trade show. There's lots of ways to make the sale. I don't want to imply that you have to be in somebody's office to apply these principles. Time and territory management is critical. And that includes the reference to the issue around who you call on. Do you call on the influencers and not just the so-called buyers? Okay. Your presentation. Think of it as a persuasion. Is that presentation logical? And does it start with easy agreement on what the client cares about? Okay. The third big bucket of skill sets is what we normally think of as advertising sales skills or any kind of sales skills. Okay. Engaging customers, asking questions, handling objections, closing, and negotiating. These are more or less the interactive parts of the sales process. And we'll talk about how we connect those things in this process as well. So what are the 5 secrets? Well, the first of the 5 secrets is that the most successful salespeople sell at the top. Now, where the top is, we'll talk about. And the top is defined differently in lots of different sales situations. But there's certainly more than one influencer. And if you're not calling on more than one influencer, you're probably not selling at the top. Okay? The second of the 5 secrets is that in order to sell at the top, you've got to be an expert in something. Senior people do not want to sit down with you and teach you about their business. They don't want to spend time with you unless you bring expertise, and you've got to be able to prove that at the beginning. The third of the 5 secrets is how to use logic that's persuasive by starting with something they easily agree to. That's the crucial starting point in your sales presentation. The fourth secret is loving the objections and rewarding the objections and using that opportunity when somebody tells you the truth to get them to tell you other objections that you might need to know. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. And finally, the fifth big secret is asking for action that you can get, as opposed to actions you can't get. You can't ask for the business because they can't give you the business, so what are you going to ask for? So we'll talk more about that. A little bit about the background here is useful. The Masters of Media Selling strategy that I train people in, whether it's this little sample that you're getting today or it's the full 2-day sessions that I'll be doing in New York in October, draw from a number of successful sales kind of regimen, including my exposure to Ziff Davis, who was famous for this back when I worked at Ziff Davis in the 1980s, 1330, a company started by Chris Whittle, who was known for quote-unquote being able to sell ice to Eskimos, and also Time Inc., who's famous for selling at the top of big companies. But what I've done is taken and integrated the latest thinking and selling in a business-to-business environment in the 21st century to those old standard, you might say, systems. One of the keys is selling to veto. Veto stands for very important top officer. But the way I think of it and the way I use it and the way I'll teach people to use it is to think of every contact you make as somebody who behaves and thinks like a very important top officer, somebody who has a very limited amount of time and needs to be treated accordingly. Solution selling, this is really all about solution selling, and spin selling is a great example of how to think critically about making complex sales processes work for you. So let's start with how to sell at the top. Masters of media sales know they've got to get to the top because salespeople or clients want to please their boss. Every single client at every level has a boss. Too many salespeople accept it when somebody says, you don't need to see me, you need to see so-and-so, the buyer. Okay? You do need to see so-and-so, the buyer. But that doesn't mean the buyer doesn't want to please the person you just called. Okay? Influence flows down, and influence flows down more in the sale of advertising than perhaps any other industrial sales process. And I say industrial sales process because I think of it as a business-to-business transaction of scale. These are big decisions that are being made by buyers compared to the size of the companies, whether it's millions being purchased by Procter & Gamble or a few hundreds being purchased by a local advertiser. It's a big decision to them. And the people who are trying to make that evaluation that you might be calling on are influenced by what they think their boss will think. Their boss will have an opinion on this because advertising sales decisions are public. In other words, if I decide to advertise with you, the public is going to find out about that decision, right? If I choose to advertise in a TV show that's going to get me boycotted, then that's going to have consequences for my business. So even at the very biggest companies, at very high levels of the company, people are aware of and executives are aware of and have opinions about advertising. And those opinions flow down through the bureaucracy that may be making the decision. So your first call should always be at the top because the top matters. And where the top is might be different from client to client. Okay, it might not be the chairman of Procter & Gamble, but it's still going to be a lot higher than the media buyer who tells you they're the ones that make the decisions. So in a big company, it's going to be one level. In a small company, it's going to be at another level. Lots of the best management will say, you don't need to see me, so-and-so. I've delegated that decision to somebody else. But the somebody else always has an opinion, okay? And they're worried about trying to please their boss that delegated them that responsibility. So whatever the scale is of the company you're working with, you want to start at the top. You want to open that door. You want to follow their instructions to perhaps call on somebody down below, but you want to keep that door open in order to maintain the relationship and influence that person to get where you need to go. Okay? So if you're going to make sales calls on people at the top, how are you going to do that? You've got to have sales pitches that really talk their language. Okay? You've got to talk about what they care about, and it's probably not going to be about, quote unquote, your capabilities or why your property is better than the other property. That's what they delegate the decisions for. Since you need to sell at the top, you've got to find a way to be an expert. By being an expert, I mean being somebody who brings value to the conversation that they don't already have. Okay? Not necessarily knowing everything, but knowing something that matters. Okay? For a lot of media companies, that means case studies of successful other companies using your medium. Okay? Or comparison metrics, or information about what's happening in the industry, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay? The key thing is to be able to go into that meeting at the top and bring value to that executive that's going to make them stop and say, okay, I'm going to spend time with this person because they know something that I might need to know. Now, Harvard Business Review had a short article about this some years ago that I think captured it really, really well, how important it is to bring value other than here's my media and here's the metrics on my media. Okay. This little article about competence-based marketing, I pulled out this quote, and I usually don't like to read quotes off of slides, but I'm going to do it because it's so important here. Marketing is in a ferment as traditional advertising declines in efficacy. With buyers increasingly savvy, how can companies resist relentless commodification and distinguish themselves from rivals? Now, if that sounds familiar to what's happening in the media business to you all, it should. Okay? An increasingly popular approach is to emphasize one's expertise in the business of the client, as opposed to as distinct from the quality of your product. Such competence-based marketing is especially persuasive in business-to-business relationships that involve hard-to-assess goods and services. Well, it's a fact. You sell in business-to-business relationships, and you sell hard-to-assess goods and services. Okay, and so being able to communicate with a client about their business and about what's happening in their business in a way that adds value to their conversation is going to make them want to spend time with you, and they're going to impute the idea that if you know that much about their situation, your media property must be good. And so they're going to spend time with you, and it's going to help you build that relationship and build your business. That relates very much to one of the key principles from Selling to Veto, which is that as soon as you have a meeting with a top executive, and by the way, I think when you think of a top executive, you might as well think of the media buyer that so often we spend time talking to, okay? Because they want to be treated like a top executive, right? You've got to immediately show them at the beginning of the conversation that you know something of value, that you've done your homework. In today's world, you can't just go in and sit down and say, so tell me about your business. You've got to come in there and say, here's what I know about your business. Tell me a little bit more. Once you've shown them that you know, that you're prepared, they're going to invest back to you in that relationship. So let's talk a little bit more about what you can be an expert on, okay? One thing you can be an expert on is how things are changing in their marketplace. Now, you're not going to know, you don't have to know everything. You just have to know one important thing, okay? You have to show them that you know this, okay? How purchase decisions are made in the client's market. So if you are selling magazine ads to an appliance manufacturer in a home magazine, you might want to be able to talk about, as an expert, how people decide what kind of dishwasher to buy if you're talking to a dishwasher company, okay? The dishwasher company is going to be very interested in how that purchase decision is made. That's what you want to be an expert on, okay? You might be an expert on how the client's customers are changing. After all, if the client's customers aren't your readers, why are you talking to them? And frankly, you should be an expert. You are required to be an expert on your readers and how their lives are changing and how they're changing the way they maybe consume media. So that's another alternative way you can be an expert. Okay, you can be an expert on how to make their advertising more effective. You might be able to deliver comparison reports showing how the click rates on an internet campaign on car advertising compared to theirs. Okay, you can't show your specific other competitors' specific data, but you can show the average of all the car advertisers to this car advertiser. You can show the average of all the hotel advertisers to this advertiser, and so forth. Okay, so that's a good example of how to make different advertising strategies perform based on data from your own media. I could go on and on and on about this, but I can't do that in 30 minutes. We've got to really hustle through this now. So finally, there's persuasion. Okay, what I found is that persuasion by force doesn't work, so let's think about what does work. Okay, there's a famous book been used in college classes all over the country for years called Influence by Robert Cialdini, and he identifies 7 forms of influence. Okay, we use them all, but I'm going to talk about one of them in particular. But let's quickly see what they are. Okay, reciprocation. If you do a favor for somebody, people have a tendency to want to do a favor back for you. So we use that in sales. We use commitment and consistency, and that's what I'm going to be circling back to here. Okay, we also use social proof, as in, well, the other people do it, so you should want to do it. And these are things that all work. Okay, if people like you, and you try to be liked as a salesperson, that helps them be friendly and convinced. You can use authority. You can refer to other authorities as a way of convincing things. You can use scarcity because people always want stuff they can't get. Okay, and of course there's a natural, what he calls primitive instant influence, that people also have a tendency to sort of want to say yes to as a form of influence. But we're really going to focus here on commitment and consistency. Okay, we want to use in our sales presentations client-centric logic that gets them to commit to agreement on simple things, and then be consistent in the logic to harder and harder decisions, which ultimately lead to, by logic, the purchase of your property and the advertising on your property. Okay, we want to have an irresistible logic of advertising sales that starts with what's the key, reaching agreement on the left, on the client's market definition, the definition of how people in the market make purchase decisions, and then we show how our media property serves those needs. And that's how the logic works. Clients love talking about their marketplace, and they love talking about how their marketplace is changing. And if you're focused on how their marketplace is changing, you're opening them up psychologically to, oh, gee whiz, maybe I better change and start buying advertising with you. If you don't open them up psychologically to that change, they're not as likely to make a change in the way that they're thinking. Okay? The other beauty of this kind of sales logic is that half of the conversation is not about your property, but about them. And that solves that bad blind date problem that we've talked about before. Okay? So you want to encourage and seek discussion and agreement in order to have that commitment and consistency. Seek agreement to the details of their situation before you go on to how your property serves them. So finally, you can think about this logic by identifying perhaps a point in the purchase decision process, like this decision funnel, where you propose they can grow their business by expanding the amount of awareness or the amount of familiarity or the consideration set, and then how your property and your proposal is going to work for you. Work for them, I should say. So 3 things about presentations. I got to keep zooming here. We know people don't like presentations. Okay, what we also know we have to do them because audio plus visuals communicates far more powerfully than verbal only. Okay, we know we're supposed to ask more questions, so when we use presentations, we can also program those places to stop in the presentation to ask more questions. Okay, so organizing your presentation in the right way will solve those problems. What you don't want to do is make it self-centered, make it all about my property. Okay, you don't want to make it long, you don't want to read it, and it better not regurgitate what's in the media kit because they can get that off your website. Okay, you want to make it conversational. You want to breeze through the early parts of the presentation, arriving at quick assent, agreement, so you have that commitment and consistency. You want to stop at the end of each section and probe for agreement or objections if necessary, and we'll talk more about objections. And of course, you want to try to close on the agreements. So objections and handling objections and welcoming objections is the fourth secret. Okay? There's an epidemic of good sales calls where nothing happens afterwards. And that's because there were no objections in that process. Okay? Too often, clients that you're calling on are either not the decision maker, so they're not going to come up, they're not thinking really hard about whether they're taking this thing seriously. They're just gathering information, okay? Or they're hiding their objections because they already know what they want to do and they don't want to have a debate with you. They just wanted to give you the courtesy of the meeting, okay? Or they're nodding and smiling and basically just sort of saying, yeah, I understand, but not yeah, I agree. Again, because they're trying to sort of move to the next meeting because they're not really taking you seriously. So this is an epidemic that we've got to deal with, and really what we want is honesty from our clients. Okay, we want to teach them when they do tell us the truth that they shouldn't, that they got treated well when they did that, that we understood them, that we acknowledged them, and we can move on. Okay. So whether your client's telling you they're too busy or you're too expensive or some really technical objection, you've got to acknowledge the importance of that and see if you can get them to tell you other good, important things. And sometimes you have to have pre-programmed probing questions to draw out the objections, like they're going to treat you really nicely, but what they're really thinking is this thing is too small. So you need to ask questions about what's the size of the smallest magazine they buy, or the size of the smallest audience size that they're interested in. Okay, and so when you think about sort of getting the objections out there, then you want to move on to the potential of closing. Okay, and closing is the fifth. Asking for the right kind of action is the fifth secret. Okay, advancing the sale requires that you move from people saying, sure, I'll keep talking to you, which is this sort of socially nice thing people do, to a trade where they're going to do something that really matters to help you move the sale ahead. The book that I referred to early on spin selling talks about how they did research on complex selling processes to determine what's the difference between a good sales call and a bad sales call when you don't, in fact, make a sale at the time. How can you tell the difference? And they determined the difference was between a continuation, where people are nice, and an advance, where you're truly moving down the path towards a sale. An advance requires that the people you're talking to agree to using their time to help you or their political capital to help you. And in most cases, I would assert in the world of advertising sales, what you want to go from is an individual meeting to having them set up for you, asking them to set up for you a group meeting with the other influencers, because that's one of the ways we solve that influencer problem. We talked about selling at the top. We've got to, if we're talking to a low person, we've got to get their bosses in the room, and if we're talking to the highest person, we want them, if they're not going to buy from us at the time, to bring together the people below them so that the people below them can see them liking the idea. We can't tell somebody your boss likes this. We can only make that work if we can get them all in the room together. So in many cases, what I recommend we do, what the best salespeople do, is close on advances like group presentations or like getting people to tell them exactly what needs to be in the RFP. to win the business. Okay. Agreement to send you an RFP, to put you on the list, is not in advance because that doesn't require any time or effort by the person you're calling on. The importance of getting those groups together is because of the fact that people may like it one minute, and then if they hear a negative comment, not like it the next minute when you're out of the room. So we want to get the people in the room together. That's the kind of thing we want to try to close on most often. So I was going to try to answer some questions. It's already the time for this session to be over. You can see on the screen the instructions if you decided you wanted to try to learn more about this. I'm going to be teaching a two full-day seminars on this stuff that you can either take 1 day or 2 days or both days of in New York, October 1st and 2nd. You can go to MediaPost and find it under their menu of events, where you can use the URL that's listed here. I'll also be sending a copy of this presentation out to everyone after I finish this thing. So there have been a number of questions coming in, and I'm going to just try to answer a couple of them. One of them is that buyers frequently say you can't call on the client, or you got to see, I'm the only person you have to see. And so you can think about that as a question around how to get to the top, okay? But it's also a question around how you handle objections, right? So the objection handling approach to that is, I understand you're the key person who's doing this work. I absolutely going to spend time with you, right? But you also have to know in your head that you're probably not going to get anywhere until you can earn their respect and trust to get them to help you set up a group presentation. And that's the test, really, of what's the quality of the material that you're bringing, the level of expertise that you're bringing to this conversation that's going to allow you to get to the higher level or not. You can never really fully accept the idea that you can't call on their boss or their client. Okay, the reason it's gotten that way is because people are so busy, but also because clients have been subjected to so many just awful sales presentations by media companies who come in and do a bad blind date version of a sales call, all about me, all about me, all about me. Finally, I say, well, gee whiz, I've been doing all the talking. I should ask you some questions. So I say, what do you think about me? Okay, that's about the way too many sales calls have been, and that's why we've got into that situation. So when you solve that problem in the construct of your sales persuasion, you're going to solve that problem for a lot of other things too. Speaking of which, one of the problems that is often that I've seen a couple of things come in here is people say, but we have a capabilities presentation that we need to go make presentations about. And I understand that. I understand that agencies set up group meetings where you're expected to come in and make a capabilities presentation sometimes. But in that case, you need to understand that you're still trying to identify and get them to agree on what their general problems are in the marketplace or how the marketplace is changing before you talk about your capabilities. And you're trying to come out of that meeting by closing on, asking for some action that gets you to the point where you're talking about a specific brand and a specific problem to make a specific proposal in order to move ahead. Otherwise, again, you had a good meeting that had no result. And we're back in that problem area. Finally, one of the last, and this is the last thing I really have time to talk about before I just got to sign off here, but I will try to, I promise you all that send in the email, other questions in that question box. They're all being recorded, and I will answer every one of them to everybody by email. But the last question that I want to try to answer here is this question of, I don't know enough to be an expert. How do I don't know enough about the client's needs. What do I do? Okay, there's two answers to that question. The first one is that the very best salespeople, the secrets of the masters here are that they are information sponges. They read everything they can about their industry. So they make themselves experts over time so that they can talk about how things are changing in their industry intelligently. The second answer to that question is, if you're in media management, you can create research on your marketplace that gives your salespeople expertise instantly. Okay, most media companies do research on their own audience. That research should be redesigned to be about the market. So, as an example, many years ago when I was ad director of Backpacker magazine, we didn't have a backpacker subscriber study. We had a backpacking industry study that showed our readership as part of that research, but it really showed how many people are buying backpacks, what's the market share of all the different backpack manufacturers, how many people are buying boots, what's the market share of all the boot manufacturers. So I could go on a sales call with the boot guy and say, your market, based on our information, you've got 17% market share, and your competitor X has 20%, and your competitor Y has 9%. And they were really interested in that. That made me an expert at the beginning, and it made me somebody they wanted to spend time with. They imputed that to mean that my magazine, and I also showed them how my magazine served their needs in terms of trying to gain that market share by making more sales. So thank you very much for your time. Thanks for staying over time a little bit here. I'm about to sign off, but again, I'll send out a copy of this presentation as a PDF to everyone now. Thank you very much.